This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
The third thing is a change is a time to restore your ministry. A time to restore your ministry. I love what Rick Warren says, a quote from Rick Warren. He says, God loves to turn crucifixions into resurrections so you can see His greatness. And that's what a change does in your ministry. It begins to restore your ministry so that you can see the greatness of God. When things seem to be going so wrong, that's when they're about to get so good. The problem with so many of us is that we think that the crucifixion is the end result, as many of them did when Jesus was being crucified. They thought, it's over with. He's being killed. It's over with. It's the end. And we think that our problem, our crisis, is where everything ends. But the crucifixion was the beginning of what God was up to. The crucifixion was the beginning of what God was up to. The crisis, the death, the end of it all was the beginning of what God was up to. It may very well be that your crisis is the beginning of what God is up to in your life. Your crisis, your problem, is the beginning of what God is up to, and it is a change that God uses to say, it's time to remind you of who you are and what you're all about. It's time to restore your ministry. Not to end it, but to restore it. One of the most beautiful pictures of this is the time that Peter walked on the water to be near Jesus. Remember that story? It's told in Matthew 14. And so they're out in a storm, and they look out, and they've just seen this amazing thing where God has fed the 5,000 men plus thousands and thousands of women and children, and just with a few loaves and a few pieces of fish, and they fed the entire crowd, and it was just an amazing thing, and there was healing, and there was amazing teaching, and it was just a glorious camp reunion. It was fabulous time. And now they're out on the sea, and they're in a storm, and Jesus walks across. They see Jesus walking across the water in the storm. That must have been pretty interesting, because when you think about it, when he's walking across the water, because there's a storm and the waves are going up and down, so is Jesus. We normally think it was just nice and calm, and he's just kind of walking on the water. It was a storm. And the boat was going up and down, and so was Jesus on the waves. And they see him walking on the stormy waves. And Peter says, Lord, if that's you, bid me to come out to you. I want to be near you. Well, why wouldn't he? He was afraid the boat was going down. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going where Jesus is. Apparently, he can walk on water. And Jesus says to him in verse 29, Matthew 14:29, and he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. I don't understand that statement at all. He saw the wind, and he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt? And when they got in the boat, the wind ceased. He didn't stop the wind to save him. Jesus is not going to stop the storm to save you. There's no promise. He might, but there's no promise that he will. The storm will continue. He saved him in the storm. He didn't save him after the storm. He saved him in the storm. There was still a storm going on. And then they got into the boat and the wind ceased. So what happened here? Well, Peter was going through a great spiritual, physical experience. And suddenly life got out of control. He's seen God do these, he's seen all these miracles happen. And now he's part of a miracle. He's actually part of the miracle. He's walking on the water. Does it get any better than that? How incredible an experience that must have been. And all of a sudden, he saw the wind. He started looking at the storm is what happened. He started looking at the crisis. He started looking at how everything was falling apart around him. And suddenly that boat looked pretty good. Kind of wish I was back in the boat because I'm drowning here. And he starts to drown. He starts going under. And he cries out, it's the last gasp. It's the last gasp. And he cries out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reaches. That's how desperate things were. Jesus didn't just kind of wait around. Remember, he waited around. We'll see this next Sunday. Jesus waited around a few days before he found out that Lazarus was dying. He could have gone in and stopped, healed him and everything would have been good. But he waited around because he had something else he wanted to do. But in Peter's case, things were so desperate that Jesus immediately reaches down and takes a hold of him. And then he takes him back to the boat. That's such a beautiful picture of the ministry. He was having this great experience. All of a sudden, life started falling apart, and he cries out, and Jesus lifts him up and says, let's go back to your ministry. Let's go back to where you're supposed to be. Let's get back focused on who you are and what you're all about. Let's restore your ministry. And that became the turning point in Peter's life and ministry.
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.